What if your entire world was contained within stone walls, your every hour dictated by ancient bells? What if your deepest hopes and fears were tied to physical objects, believed to hold incredible power? Step back into the year 1350 and uncover the hidden world of medieval nuns and their sacred treasures. Number 11. The personal cross, or medal. A small glint of metal, or perhaps a worn piece of wood, nestled against the wool habit, always close to the heart. This was the personal cross or medal, an object often given to a nun upon her entry into the convent, or at her solemn profession of vows. It was not a grand public display of faith, but a deeply private and intimate companion, a constant, tangible reminder of her commitment and the spiritual journey she had embarked upon. For a nun living a life structured by communal prayer and shared experience, this personal sacred item offered a unique connection to her own individual spiritual path, a silent anchor in moments of solitude or challenge. Some were simple, carved from humble wood, perhaps even by the nun herself or a carpenter in the convent. Others were cast in base metals like pewter or bronze, perhaps with a simple depiction of Christ crucified or a saint. The more fortunate, or those from wealthier families, might possess a silver cross, perhaps even inlaid with enamel or small, unpolished gemstones. Medals were also common, often depicting the Virgin Mary, a patron saint, or Saint Benedict for Benedictine nuns. Imagine the intricate detail on a tiny medal, perhaps no larger than a thumbprint, showing the Blessed Mother holding the Christ child, or a saint in their iconic pose, their attributes clear even on such a small scale. These details were not just decorative. They were stories, reminders of lives lived in devotion, examples to emulate. The very act of wearing such an object spoke volumes. It was a physical manifestation of an interior state, a visible sign of an invisible grace. A nun might touch her cross or medal unconsciously during moments of quiet contemplation, or consciously in times of distress or fervent prayer. Cool metal or smooth wood against her skin provided a grounding sensation, a point of focus when her thoughts might wander. It was a small, quiet dialogue between the soul and the divine, facilitated by a simple, everyday object. She might trace the outline of the cross with her finger during prayer, feeling the grooves of the carving, allowing the tactile sensation to deepen her concentration. The history of wearing personal devotional items stretches back centuries before the medieval period. Early Christians often wore symbols like the fish or the chi-rho to signify their faith, sometimes secretly. By the medieval era, with Christianity firmly established, these items became more openly worn, serving not just as ideas, but as powerful tools for personal piety. For nuns, who had renounced the world and its trappings, these personal symbols were not about vanity or status, but about profound spiritual allegiance. They were part of their spiritual uniform, just as much as their habit. Records from convents occasionally mention the items bestowed upon new entrants, sometimes including a simple cross or a medal, emphasizing its role in the initiation rites. These gifts were not just material possessions, they were imbued with spiritual significance through blessings by priests and the very act of their presentation during a ceremony. The symbolic weight of the personal cross was enormous. It directly represented Christ's sacrifice, the central mystery of Christian faith. For a nun who had chosen a life of self-denial and spiritual discipline, the cross was a daily reminder of the path she had chosen, a path that mirrored in its own small way the suffering and redemption of Christ. It was a call to humility, obedience, and enduring love. The medal, too, carried deep meaning. A medal of the Virgin Mary, for instance, would remind the nun of Mary's purity, obedience, and her role as intercessor, a powerful figure for a medieval woman dedicated to God. A medal of Saint Benedict would signify allegiance to the Benedictine rule, reinforcing the principles of stability, conversion of manners, and obedience that shaped her monastic life. These were not just ornaments. They were tiny, theological treatises, worn and absorbed through daily proximity. Stories from medieval hagiographies sometimes describe nuns clinging to their crosses during moments of temptation or illness, believing in their protective power. While the primary function was spiritual, the belief in the apotropaic, or protective qualities of sacred objects, was widespread. A nun might believe that her blessed cross could ward off evil thoughts or physical ailments, offering a tangible connection to divine protection. This belief was not superstition, but a deeply ingrained aspect of medieval piety, where the spiritual and physical worlds were intimately intertwined. The very blessing of the object by a priest or bishop was believed to imbue it with grace, making it a conduit for God's blessings. The nun, by wearing it, placed herself continuously within that stream of grace. The materials themselves also held significance. Wood, simple and natural, spoke of humility and the earthly origins of Christ. Metals, often purified by fire, symbolized strength and endurance. The craftsmanship, no matter how simple, was an act of devotion in itself. A novice nun might spend hours polishing her small pewter cross, reflecting on the devotion it represented. The very act of caring for this small object became a meditative practice, a quiet ritual of reverence. It was a tiny piece of beauty, perhaps the only personal adornment she was permitted, and thus held immense sentimental and spiritual value. It was a cherished possession, not for its material worth, but for its spiritual weight, a silent witness to every prayer, every struggle, and every moment of joy in her cloistered life. Number 10. The Prayer Rulebook. Within the cloistered walls of the medieval nunnery, order was not merely a convenience, it was a spiritual imperative, a pathway to holiness. Guiding every hour, every task, and every communal moment was the Prayer Rulebook, often a beautifully copied manuscript of the Rule of Saint Benedict, or perhaps the Rule of Saint Augustine or Saint Clare, depending on the order. This was not simply a book of guidelines. It was a living document, a sacred text that embodied the very foundation of the nuns' existence, their spiritual constitution. It was the blueprint for their pursuit of salvation, dictated by centuries of monastic wisdom. For nuns, the rule was more than just words on parchment. It was the articulation of their vows, the framework for their daily discipline, and the pathway to communal harmony. Every nun, from the venerable abbess to the newest novice, was bound by its precepts. The rule dictated the hours of prayer, the principles of silence, the virtues of obedience and humility, the balance between work and contemplation. It laid out the duties of each member, the organization of the convent, and even the appropriate responses to transgressions. It was a comprehensive guide to monastic life, ensuring that every action, no matter how small, contributed to the collective pursuit of spiritual perfection. These rule books were often works of art in themselves, hand-copied by skilled scribes, sometimes even by the nuns within the convent's own scriptorium. They could be intricately illuminated with vibrant pigments and gold leaf. The initial capital letters of each chapter might blossom into swirling vines or depict tiny scenes from monastic life or the life of the saint whose rule it was. Parchment, carefully prepared from animal skin, offered a smooth surface for the ink, making the text durable for generations of use. Imagine the reverence with which a nun would turn its pages, the scent of aged parchment and perhaps faint traces of the pigments, connecting her directly to the generations of sisters who had read and lived by the same words. Daily life revolved around the rule. In the chapter house, a central meeting place, sections of the rule were read aloud each day, often by the abbess or a designated sister. This daily reading was not just an informative exercise. It was a meditative act, a communal reaffirmation of their commitment. The nuns would listen intently, perhaps reflecting on how they had lived up to the rule's ideals that day, or how they might better embody its principles in the future. Discussions might follow, though always within the bounds of monastic decorum, exploring the practical application of the rule's wisdom to their daily challenges. It was a continuous process of learning and spiritual refinement. The rule of Saint Benedict, one of the most widespread and influential, was renowned for its balanced approach, emphasizing moderation and stability. It was designed to foster a community where individuals could thrive spiritually while supporting each other. Phrases like ora et labora, pray and work, encapsulated the Benedictine ideal, stressing the importance of both spiritual devotion and practical labor. For nuns, this meant hours spent in choir singing divine office, but also in the garden tending herbs, in the scriptorium copying manuscripts, or in the infirmary caring for the sick. The rule provided the structure that allowed these diverse activities to coalesce into a coherent, sacred life. The rule also served as a tool for personal reflection. Beyond the communal readings, a nun might retreat to her cell, if she had one, or to a quiet corner of the cloister to read and meditate on specific passages. She might carry a smaller personal copy if available, or rely on her memory. These moments of private study deepened her understanding of her vows and her relationship with God. It was a personal dialogue with the foundational texts of her chosen path, a source of guidance in moments of doubt or introspection. The wisdom contained within its pages was a constant wellspring of spiritual nourishment. The very existence of these rule books in medieval convents speaks to the high value placed on literacy, at least for some nuns. While not all nuns were highly educated, many were, particularly those from aristocratic families or those in leadership roles. Scriptoriums within convents were not uncommon, where nuns meticulously copied religious texts, including the rule itself for their own community or for other religious houses. This act of copying was seen as a form of prayer, a labor of love that contributed to the spiritual wealth of the Church, and the detailed work of preparing the parchment, mixing the inks, and carefully forming each letter was a meditative discipline in itself, connecting the scribe directly to the sacred words she was transcribing. Disputes within a convent, should they arise, were often resolved by referring back to the rule. It served as the ultimate authority, a testament to its enduring power and spiritual weight. The abbess, in her leadership, was expected to embody the rule and interpret it wisely for her community. Her judgments and decisions were ideally rooted in its principles, ensuring consistency and fairness. The rule was not just a historical document. It was a living constitution, guiding every aspect of the nuns' shared life, ensuring that their daily existence was an intentional and continuous act of devotion, striving collectively for a state of spiritual perfection. Within the consecrated walls, it was the heart of their ordered sacred world. Number 9. The icon or statue of the Virgin Mary. In almost every nook of a medieval nunnery, from the grand chapel altar to a quiet alcove in the cloister, stood a figure of the Virgin Mary, either as a painted icon or a carved statue. For the nuns, Mary was not merely a historical figure or a distant saint. She was a powerful mother, a comforting intercessor, and a perfect model of purity and obedience. Her presence, whether in vivid colors on wood or in serene stone, infused the convent with a profound sense of maternal warmth and divine grace, making her one of the most cherished sacred objects in their daily lives. These depictions of Mary varied widely in style and material. Some were humble wooden carvings, perhaps adorned with simple paint, created by local artisans. Others were grand, majestic statues commissioned by wealthy patrons or the convent itself, crafted from marble, alabaster, or gilded wood. Many were painted icons, sometimes in the Byzantine style, with Mary's face serene and otherworldly, her gaze drawing the viewer into contemplation. These icons often depicted Mary holding the Christ child, emphasizing her role as Mother of God or standing alone, sometimes with hands clasped in prayer or open in a gesture of welcome. The colors used were often rich and symbolic: blue for heaven and truth, red for divine love, gold for divinity and light. The rituals surrounding the Virgin Mary were central to a nun's spiritual life. Nuns would regularly kneel before her image, offering prayers, lighting candles, and placing flowers at her feet. The singing of Marian hymns like the Salve Regina or Ave Maris Stella was a daily occurrence, often performed communally in the choir. These hymns, beautiful and soaring, were expressions of profound love and devotion, echoing through the stone arches of the chapel. A nun might spend hours in silent contemplation before a particular statue or icon, pouring out her heart, seeking solace or intercession for her own struggles, or for the needs of the wider world outside her cloister. Cult of the Virgin Mary blossomed in the medieval period, reaching new heights of popularity. Mary was seen as the most approachable of all saints, a compassionate figure who could intercede with her Son on behalf of humanity. For medieval women, including nuns, Mary offered a powerful female archetype, a woman of immense strength, humility, and unwavering faith. She was a figure they could intimately relate to, as mother, daughter, and servant of God. Many convents were founded under Marian patronage, dedicating their entire community to her protection and inspiration. The very name of the convent might reflect this devotion, such as Our Lady of the Angels or St. Mary's Abbey. These icons and statues were not simply decorative. They were believed to be conduits of grace, sometimes even possessing miraculous powers. Stories abounded of statues weeping, eyes opening, or healing the sick. While such tales might seem fantastical to modern minds, for medieval nuns they were tangible proofs of divine presence and Mary's active involvement in the world. Pilgrimages to sites with particularly venerated Marian images, though often beyond the reach of cloistered nuns, were a testament to the popular belief in their efficacy. Within the convent, the presence of such an image was a continuous source of comfort and spiritual power, a silent guardian watching over their lives. Nuns themselves often played a role in the creation and adornment of these sacred images. In some convents, nuns skilled in needlework would embroider elaborate vestments for statues of Mary, using precious threads, pearls, and even jewels. These garments, often changed seasonally or for feast days, were acts of profound veneration, transforming the statue into an even more magnificent representation of the Queen of Heaven. Other nuns might have been artists themselves, painting icons or carving smaller devotional figures for their own cells or for the communal spaces, pouring their piety and skill into every brushstroke or chisel mark. The creative process itself became a form of prayer, a dedication of talent to the divine. Placement of these images within the convent was strategic. A large statue or icon often dominated the main altar in the chapel, the focal point for all liturgical prayer. Smaller images might be found in the infirmary, offering comfort to the sick, or in the refectory, reminding the nuns of Mary's humility even during their meals. Each location served to integrate Mary's presence into every aspect of monastic life, ensuring that the nuns were constantly surrounded by her benevolent influence. The very act of moving through the convent, encountering these images at every turn, became a continuous, unspoken prayer, a constant reorientation towards the divine. The Virgin Mary represented hope and mercy in a world often marked by hardship and fear. For nuns, whose lives were dedicated to intercessory prayer for the world, Mary was the ultimate intercessor. They would pray to her for protection from plague, for the well-being of their families outside the walls, for the peace of Christendom, and for the salvation of souls. Her image stood as a testament to their unwavering faith, a visible sign of the profound spiritual bond that connected them to heaven. It was a source of endless inspiration, a silent sermon in wood or paint continually inviting them to a deeper devotion, mirroring Mary's perfect acceptance of God's will. Number 8. The oil lamp or candle. Within the hushed silence of a medieval nunnery, especially during the long hours of the night offices or before the early morning light, the flickering glow of oil lamps and candles provided not just illumination, but profound spiritual meaning. These were more than mere sources of light. They were powerful symbols of Christ, the light of the world, and constant reminders of vigilance, prayer, and divine presence. For a nun, tending to these lamps and candles was a sacred duty, and their perpetual glow was a source of comfort and a visible manifestation of their unceasing devotion. The types of illumination varied. Simple oil lamps, often made of clay or metal, would hold olive oil and a wick, providing a steady, gentle glow. These were economical and practical for lighting cells, hallways, or specific reading nooks. Candles, particularly those made from beeswax, were highly prized for their clean burn and pleasant scent. Beeswax was considered pure and symbolic of Christ's humanity derived from the Virgin Mary, and candles made from it were often reserved for liturgical use on the altar or for special feast days. Cost of wax was considerable, making the use of beeswax candles a testament to the convent's resources or the generosity of its patrons. The most prominent use of a perpetual flame was the sanctuary lamp, a single, ever-burning light placed near the high altar, usually in a hanging vessel, signifying the real presence of the Blessed Sacrament in the tabernacle. For nuns, this constant flame was a focal point of adoration, a visible affirmation of Christ's abiding presence within their chapel. Even when Mass was not being celebrated, this lamp burned a silent vigil, drawing the nuns into a continuous state of prayer and reverence whenever they entered the chapel. It was a tangible connection to the divine, a silent heartbeat of the convent's spiritual life. The rituals surrounding lamps and candles were deeply integrated into daily monastic life. Nuns responsible for the sacristy would meticulously clean the oil lamps, trim wicks, and ensure a constant supply of oil. They would melt and mold wax for candles, a laborious but meditative process that transformed raw materials into sacred light. The act of lighting a candle before an icon or a statue of Mary was a personal offering, a small act of devotion. During the night offices, the darkness of the chapel would be punctuated by the soft glow of individual candles or lamps, allowing the nuns to read their psalters and hymnals as they chanted the divine office in unison. The symbolism of light was rich and multifaceted for medieval Christians. Light represented truth, goodness, and the presence of God. Darkness symbolized sin, ignorance, and evil. Thus, the deliberate act of dispelling darkness with light was a spiritual act, mirroring the triumph of Christ over sin and death. A nun lighting a candle might quietly offer a prayer for enlightenment, for wisdom, or for protection from the darkness of temptation. The warmth of the flame, the gentle dance of light and shadow, created an atmosphere conducive to contemplation and deep spiritual focus. Convent records sometimes contain entries detailing the purchase of oil and wax, highlighting their essential nature for the smooth functioning of monastic life. These were not luxuries, but necessities, as crucial as food and water for the spiritual rhythm of the community. In convents with their own apiaries, the nuns might even produce their own beeswax, turning the labor of beekeeping into an act of devotion, with the honey and wax as blessed byproducts of God's creation. This connection to the land and its resources further deepened their appreciation for these sacred illuminations. Beyond the chapel, individual nuns might have a small lamp or candle in their cell, particularly if they were permitted to read or engage in private prayer outside of communal hours. This small personal light became a companion in their solitude, allowing them to immerse themselves in sacred texts or engage in quiet meditation long after the sun had set. It was a beacon of personal devotion, a tiny world of light within the larger darkness, facilitating an intimate dialogue between the nun and her creator. The fleeting nature of a flame also carried profound meaning. Consumed itself to give light, a powerful metaphor for the nun's own life of self-sacrifice and dedication to God. Each lamp and candle, whether burning perpetually or for a short time, was a reminder of their continuous prayer, their watchful waiting for the return of Christ, and their commitment to being light in a dark world. It was a beautiful, tangible symbol of hope, a constant testament to the enduring presence of the divine, quietly burning through the silent hours within the sacred walls of the nunnery. Number 7. The holy water sprinkler or stoup. In the daily rhythm of a medieval nunnery, purity and blessings were paramount. Every entrance, every ritual, every moment of transition was often marked by holy water, a simple yet profoundly sacred substance. The holy water sprinkler, also known as an aspergillum or the holy water stoup, a basin often carved into a wall or placed on a stand, were therefore essential instruments in maintaining a hallowed atmosphere, purifying the faithful and warding off evil. For a nun, these objects were integral to the daily life of blessing and protection, a constant reminder of spiritual cleansing and divine grace. The holy water stoup was typically found at the entrance to the chapel or refectory. It might be a simple stone basin, sometimes quite large, filled with water, blessed by a priest. Its placement ensured that every nun entering a sacred space could make the sign of the cross with holy water, a customary gesture of purification and reverence. This simple act was a moment of mindful transition, shedding the dust of the mundane world and preparing the heart for prayer or sacred communal activity. The smooth, cool stone of the stoup, worn by countless hands over generations, held a palpable sense of accumulated piety. The aspergillum, on the other hand, was a more portable tool, often a metal rod with a perforated ball at one end, designed to hold and sprinkle holy water. These could range from simple brass or copper instruments to more ornate silver ones perhaps, with engraved patterns or small devotional symbols. It was primarily used by a priest during blessings, but in convents, certain nuns, particularly the sacristan or abbess, might use smaller versions for specific rituals or daily blessings within their domain. The gentle arc of the sprinkled water, catching the light as it descended, was a visual prayer, an act of purification made manifest. Preparation of holy water was itself a sacred process, typically performed by a priest. It involved blessing water with salt, and often incorporating prayers of exorcism to purify it and imbue it with divine power. This elaborate blessing transformed ordinary water into a potent spiritual tool, believed to have the power to cleanse from venial sins, repel evil spirits, offer protection, and bring God's blessings upon people, places, and objects. For the nuns, knowing that the water they touched was so carefully consecrated deepened their reverence for it. The rituals involving holy water were pervasive. Nuns would bless themselves upon entering the chapel, a habitual gesture of respect and spiritual readiness. Before communal meals in the refectory, the space and sometimes even the food itself might be blessed with holy water, transforming everyday sustenance into a holy gift. During processions, especially on feast days, the aspergillum would be used to sprinkle holy water, blessing the path and the participants, sanctifying the very ground they walked upon. These acts infused the ordinary with the extraordinary, consecrating their entire environment. The belief in the protective qualities of holy water was profound in the medieval period. It was thought to be a potent defense against demonic influence, a shield against temptation, and a source of healing. A nun might sprinkle holy water on a sick sister, praying for her recovery. She might bless her cell with it before sleeping, believing it would ward off evil dreams or spiritual attack. This was not viewed as superstition, but as a practical application of divine grace, a tangible means by which God's protective power could be invoked and made present in their lives. The fear of unseen spiritual dangers was very real, and holy water offered a sense of security and peace. Convent records and inventories often listed the presence of holy water stoups and aspergilla, sometimes specifying their materials and craftsmanship. These were not trivial items, but essential liturgical implements, carefully maintained and highly valued for their spiritual utility. The sacristan nun, responsible for the sacred vessel's investments, would have the duty of ensuring the stoup was always filled with freshly blessed water, a task carried out with meticulous care and devotion. Physical effort of maintaining these objects became a silent prayer, a continuous act of service to the divine. The very sensation of the water, cool and cleansing, had a powerful effect. It was a tangible connection to the sacrament of baptism, a reminder of their initial cleansing from sin and their entrance into the Christian community. Each time a nun dipped her fingers into the stoup or felt the gentle spray of the aspergillum, it was a reaffirmation of her vows, a renewed commitment to a life of purity and devotion. It was a simple, yet profound, act that knitted together the mundane and the sacred, ensuring that the nun's world remained continually consecrated and protected by divine grace, always ready to welcome the divine presence. Number 6. The monstrance. Within the profound sanctity of a medieval nunnery, especially for orders dedicated to Eucharistic adoration, the monstrance stood as a dazzling beacon of divine presence, arguably one of the most spiritually charged objects in the entire convent. Its purpose was singular and awe-inspiring: to display the consecrated host, the body of Christ, for veneration and adoration. For a nun, the monstrance was the most direct visible manifestation of their Lord within their midst, a tangible link to the sacred mystery at the heart of their faith, inspiring countless hours of fervent prayer and silent devotion. Monstrances were designed to be magnificent, reflecting the supreme reverence due to the Blessed Sacrament. They were typically crafted from precious metals, often silver or gold, and frequently adorned with an array of jewels, enamel work, and intricate filigree. The most common form was the sunburst design, where a central crystal or glass window, known as a luna, held the host, surrounded by rays of light emanating outwards, symbolizing Christ as the Sun of Justice and the light of the world. Other designs might feature architectural elements, angels, or biblical scenes, all pointing to the central mystery of the Eucharist. The sheer artistry of these objects was intended to elevate the soul and draw the beholder into deeper contemplation. The rituals surrounding the monstrance were among the most solemn in the convent. It was reserved for special occasions: the Feast of Corpus Christi, a celebration dedicated to the body and blood of Christ, and periods of solemn Eucharistic adoration, often called exposition of the Blessed Sacrament. During exposition, the monstrance would be placed on the high altar, drawing all eyes and hearts towards the sacred host. Nuns would gather in the choir, kneeling for extended periods, sometimes for hours, in silent prayer and contemplation before the exposed sacrament. This was a profound act of love and worship, recognizing the real presence of Christ in their midst. The historical development of the monstrance is closely tied to the rise of intense Eucharistic devotion in the later medieval period. While belief in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist had always been central to Christian faith, the 13th century saw an increased desire for visual veneration of the host outside of the Mass. The Feast of Corpus Christi, established in the 13th century, further popularized this devotion, leading to the development of vessels specifically designed to display the host. For nuns, this practice offered a unique and deeply personal way to express their love for Christ, to spend time in His direct presence, and to offer intercessory prayers for the world. The spiritual atmosphere during Eucharistic adoration was often described as intensely profound. The silence in the chapel would be broken only by the soft rustle of habits, the occasional sigh, or perhaps the distant sound of a bell. Each nun, fixed on the radiant monstrance, would engage in private prayer, meditation, or simply an act of quiet presence, experiencing a deep sense of intimacy with Christ. It was a time for profound spiritual renewal, for casting off the anxieties of the world, and for drawing closer to the divine. The very act of gazing upon the host through the crystal of the monstrance was considered a spiritual communion in itself. In some contemplative orders, Eucharistic adoration formed a core part of their charism. Their specific spiritual mission, poor clerics, for instance, were renowned for their devotion to the Blessed Sacrament, spending significant portions of their day in adoration before the monstrance. This focus was not just about personal piety. It was also an act of intercession for the whole Church and the world, believing that their prayers before Christ in the Eucharist had immense spiritual power to bring about grace and healing. Their sacrifice of constant prayer was offered directly in the visible presence of their Lord. The precious materials and exquisite craftsmanship of the monstrance were not seen as worldly extravagance, but as fitting tributes to the King of Kings. Every jewel, every delicate curve of silver, every polished surface was an offering, a testament to the boundless love and reverence felt for Christ. The care taken in preserving and cleaning the monstrance by the sacristan nun was an act of profound devotion, ensuring that this most sacred vessel was always in pristine condition, ready to reveal the divine presence. The very weight of the monstrance, when lifted and placed upon the altar, would have conveyed a physical manifestation of its immense spiritual gravity. It was the heart of the convent's spiritual life, a source of endless grace, drawing every nun into deeper communion with their Lord. Number 5. The chalice. The very heart of the medieval nunnery's spiritual life, often enshrined with the utmost reverence on the high altar of the convent chapel, was the chalice. This sacred vessel, typically fashioned from precious metals, held the consecrated wine transformed during the Mass into the blood of Christ. For nuns, though they did not consecrate the elements themselves, the chalice was an object of profound awe and central to the liturgy they attended daily. It represented the ultimate sacrifice, the covenant between God and humanity, and was a tangible focal point for their participation in the most sacred of Christian rites. Chalice designs in the medieval period were often exquisite, reflecting the immense importance of the Eucharist. They were usually made of gold or silver, sometimes gilded, and frequently adorned with precious stones, intricate enamel work, or engraved biblical scenes. The form typically included a wide base for stability, a knob or node in the stem for easy handling, and a cup or cuppa designed to hold the wine. The artistry and craftsmanship of a chalice were not merely for aesthetic pleasure. They were acts of devotion intended to honor the sacred contents it would hold. The weight of a substantial chalice, gleaming under the candlelight, communicated its immense value, both material and spiritual. The chalice was indispensable to the celebration of Mass, which for many nuns, particularly those in cloistered contemplative orders, was the central event of their day. While a priest would officiate and consecrate the elements, the nuns participated through prayer, song, and spiritual communion. They witnessed the elevation of the chalice during the consecration, a moment of profound silence and adoration, believing that at that instant, the wine truly became the blood of Christ. This was the pinnacle of their communal worship, a direct encounter with the divine mystery. Historically, the chalice has been central to Christian worship since the earliest days of the Church. Early chalices were simpler, often made of glass or wood, but as the Church grew and developed, so too did the materials and designs of its sacred vessels, reflecting a growing reverence for the Eucharist. By the medieval period, sumptuary laws often dictated that chalices must be made of noble metals, further emphasizing their sacred status and preventing the use of less worthy materials for such a holy purpose. These rules ensured that the chalice always conveyed dignity and sanctity. For nuns, the chalice was not just an object to be seen, it was deeply interwoven with their personal spiritual understanding of Christ's passion. The wine in the chalice symbolized the blood poured out for redemption, a sacrifice that resonated deeply with their vows of self-denial and devotion. They would meditate on this mystery during Mass, allowing the sight of the chalice to deepen their reflection on the immense love and suffering of Christ. It was a powerful visual aid for meditation, drawing their hearts into the very essence of the Christian narrative. Although cloistered nuns did not typically administer the sacraments, certain abbesses, particularly in earlier periods or in specific orders, held significant spiritual authority within their convents, sometimes including privileges. Even without direct handling, the care and maintenance of the chalice were often responsibilities of the sacristan nun, who would meticulously clean it, prepare it for Mass, and store it safely in the sacristy. This hands-on care was an act of deep reverence, a way for the nuns to serve the sacred even without consecrating themselves. The chalice also represented the spiritual sustenance offered to the community. Just as it held the blood of Christ for spiritual nourishment, it symbolized the spiritual food the nuns received through their faith and communal life. It was a vessel of grace, a constant reminder of the spiritual riches available to them through their dedication to God. The very act of the priest presenting the chalice during communion, even if the nuns received only the host, was a powerful reminder of the complete sacrifice and the full spiritual communion available to them. It was a promise of eternal life contained within a vessel of earthly beauty, a constant source of profound spiritual nourishment within the sacred walls of their medieval nunnery. Number 4. The Book of Hours. Within the private confines of a medieval nun's cell, or perhaps clutched in her hands during a moment of quiet reflection in the cloister garden, the Book of Hours represented a profoundly personal connection to the divine. This was not a liturgical book for communal worship, but a highly personalized prayer book designed to guide the individual through a cycle of daily prayers following the canonical hours. For a nun, the Book of Hours was a constant companion, a portable sanctuary, a personal gateway to spiritual devotion that transcended the communal rituals of the convent. Books of Hours varied immensely, ranging from modest, simply copied versions on sturdy parchment to lavishly illuminated masterpieces commissioned by wealthy patrons or aristocratic families before their daughters entered the convent. The most exquisite examples were true works of art, featuring vibrant pigments, gold leaf, intricate borders, and miniature paintings that depicted biblical scenes, lives of saints, or everyday life. These miniatures were not just beautiful. They were visual aids to prayer and contemplation, often telling stories or illustrating the prayers on the page. The very act of turning a page and encountering a new, vibrant image could transport the nun's mind to the sacred narratives. Typical contents of a Book of Hours included a calendar marking feast days, excerpts from the Gospels, the little office of the Blessed Virgin Mary, the core of the book, the penitential psalms, litanies, and various prayers to saints. The little office of the Blessed Virgin Mary was structured similarly to the divine office sung in choir, with prayers designated for different times of the day and night: matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline. This structure allowed a nun to align her personal prayers with the liturgical rhythm of the wider church, even when she was not in choir. The utility of the Book of Hours for a nun was immense. While she would participate in communal chanting of the divine office in the chapel, the Book of Hours allowed her to continue her private devotion at other times. She might use it in her cell, before sleeping, in a quiet moment during the day, or during times of personal need. It offered flexibility and a deeper individual spiritual discipline. The ability to read and understand Latin, the language of these books, was highly valued, and many nuns, especially those from noble families, were literate in Latin, enabling them to fully engage with the sacred texts. The historical development of the Book of Hours reflects a broader trend in the later medieval period towards increased lay piety and personal devotion. As more people sought ways to practice their faith outside of formal church services, these personal prayer books became incredibly popular. For women entering convents, often bringing their dowry, which might include such a book, it provided a comforting link to their former lives while adapting to their new spiritual journey. It was a tangible piece of their past, now dedicated to their future with God. Production of books of hours was a significant industry, with scribes, illuminators, and binders working to create these treasured volumes. In some convents, particularly those with a strong intellectual tradition or a scriptorium, nuns themselves might have been involved in copying or even illuminating these books. Painstaking work of transcribing text, drawing intricate designs, and applying delicate layers of pigment was a spiritual discipline in itself, a labor of love dedicated to the glorification of God and the spiritual enrichment of their sisters. The precise strokes of the quill, the careful mixing of egg, tempera, and pigment became a form of prayer. A nun's book of hours was often deeply personal, bearing her own annotations, prayers written in the margins, or perhaps a small drawing. These editions transformed the book into a unique spiritual diary, a record of her deepest reflections and spiritual journey. The wear and tear on the pages, the smudges of fingerprints, the faint scent of beeswax from candlelight, all told a story of countless hours spent in devotion, a testament to the profound connection between the nun and her treasured volume. It was a constant source of inspiration, a quiet guide through the spiritual landscape of her cloistered life, always ready to open to a prayer that spoke directly to her heart. Number 3. The reliquary. Within the sacred confines of a medieval nunnery, few objects commanded as much reverence and awe as the reliquary. This was no ordinary container. It was a consecrated vessel designed to house holy relics, fragments of saints' bones, pieces of their clothing, or objects they had touched, believed to be imbued with divine power and grace. For a nun, the reliquary was a tangible link to the communion of saints, a direct physical connection to those who had lived lives of exemplary holiness, serving as a focal point for veneration, intercession, and profound spiritual inspiration. Reliquaries took an astonishing variety of forms, reflecting their precious contents and the artistic styles of the era. Some were small, simple boxes, perhaps made of wood or lead, while others were grand architectural constructions of gold, silver, bronze, and crystal, often adorned with enamel, jewels, and intricate carvings. They could be shaped like the body part they contained, such as an arm reliquary for an arm bone, or a head reliquary for a skull fragment. Others might resemble miniature churches, crosses, or even animals. The artistry involved was meant to honor the sanctity of the relic and elevate the minds of the faithful towards the heavenly realm. The gleam of precious metals, the sparkle of gemstones, and the meticulous craftsmanship spoke volumes about the immense value placed on these sacred treasures. The veneration of relics was a cornerstone of medieval Christian piety. Saints were not just historical figures, they were powerful intercessors with God, their physical remains believed to retain a spiritual potency. For nuns who lived a life dedicated to prayer and spiritual perfection, the presence of relics within their convent was a profound blessing. They would gather before the reliquary, often in the convent chapel, to offer prayers of intercession, seeking the saints' help for their own spiritual struggles, for healing, or for the needs of the wider community and the world outside their walls. The rituals surrounding reliquaries were solemn and deeply meaningful. On feast days of particular saints, their reliquaries might be processed around the cloister or chapel, accompanied by chants and incense, a vibrant expression of communal devotion. Nuns might approach the reliquary, sometimes permitted to touch or kiss the container, believing that this physical contact could transmit blessings or healing. Presence of a significant relic could also draw pilgrims to the convent, bringing donations and increasing the convent's prestige and spiritual renown. This interaction, though limited for cloistered nuns, connected them to the broader currents of medieval popular piety. The historical basis for relics goes back to the early Christian martyrs, whose graves became sites of veneration. Over centuries, the practice evolved, with relics being carefully preserved and housed in increasingly elaborate containers. The authenticity of relics was a serious concern, leading to detailed processes of verification and translation, moving relics from one place to another. For a nunnery, acquiring a relic, especially a first-class relic, a part of the saint's body, was an enormous spiritual achievement, signifying divine favor and enhancing the convent's spiritual authority. These acquisitions were often recorded in convent chronicles, detailing the relic's provenance and the joy it brought to the community. Types of relics varied. First-class relics were parts of the saint's body, bone, hair, blood. Second-class relics were items owned or frequently used by the saint, clothing, prayer books, and third-class relics were objects that had touched a first-class relic. For a nun, even a small fragment of a saint's cloak or a tiny piece of bone housed within a grand reliquary represented an intimate connection to centuries of holiness, a visible manifestation of the cloud of witnesses who had gone before them. It was a tangible connection to the spiritual lineage of the Church. Care of the reliquaries often fell to the sacristan nun, who would meticulously clean and polish them, ensuring they were presented with utmost dignity. The very act of caring for these precious objects was an act of worship, a dedication of service to the saints and to God. The reliquary was more than just a container. It was a symbol of the Church's continuity, its enduring faith, and its triumphant march through history, constantly reminding the nuns of their place within this sacred lineage and inspiring them to emulate the virtuous lives of the saints whose remnants rested within the precious vessel. Number 2. The Rosary. A string of beads, perhaps simple wooden spheres or intricately carved pieces of bone, clutched in a nun's hand as she walked the cloister or knelt in her cell, represented an intensely personal and profoundly powerful form of devotion, the Rosary. This ancient prayer tool, dedicated primarily to the Virgin Mary, was a rhythmic, meditative practice that guided the nun through cycles of prayer and contemplation on the mysteries of Christ's life. For a medieval nun, the Rosary was a constant companion, a tactile guide to spiritual focus, and a beautiful pathway to both Marian and Christ-centered devotion. The Rosary's form was relatively simple, a series of beads, usually divided into decades, groups of 10, separated by larger beads or markers, often culminating in a crucifix or a medal. The number of beads could vary, but the most common form, familiar today, involved 150 Hail Marys, paralleling the 150 Psalms of the Psalter, which earned the Rosary the moniker Psalter of Mary. Materials ranged from humble seeds or pebbles used by layfolk to intricately carved amber, coral, jet, or even precious metals for wealthier individuals or for formal liturgical use. A nun might have a simple, durable rosary for daily use, its beads smoothed by countless prayers, or a more decorative one perhaps given to her as a gift upon entering the convent. The core of the rosary prayer involved reciting specific prayers, the Our Father, Hail Mary, and Glory Be, while meditating on specific mysteries from the lives of Jesus and Mary. These mysteries were typically divided into joyful, like the Annunciation and Nativity, sorrowful, like the Crucifixion, and glorious, like the Resurrection and Assumption. As the nun moved her fingers along the beads, her mind would focus on these sacred events, allowing the repetitive prayers to create a meditative rhythm that opened her heart and mind to deeper contemplation. This blend of vocal prayer and mental meditation was a powerful spiritual exercise. The historical development of the Rosary is a fascinating journey. While the precise form of the rosary we know today crystallized in the later medieval period, the practice of using prayer beads and reciting repeated prayers has ancient roots. Early monks and hermits used pebbles or knots in ropes to count their prayers. The devotion to Mary grew significantly in the medieval era, and the confluence of counting prayers with Marian devotion led to the development of the rosary as a popular and accessible form of prayer for both clergy and lay people. The Dominicans in particular played a significant role in popularizing and formalizing the rosary devotion, spreading its practice throughout Europe. For nuns, especially those in contemplative orders, the rosary offered a way to fulfill their vow of perpetual prayer and deepen their connection to Christ through Mary. It was a portable form of devotion that could be prayed anywhere, in the garden, while performing manual labor, during moments of solitude in their cell, or collectively in the choir. Tactile sensation of the beads provided a grounding element, helping to prevent the mind from wandering and keeping the prayer focused. It was a physical manifestation of their continuous prayer, a tangible link to the divine even in moments of quiet reflection. The making of rosaries was also a common craft in some convents. Nuns might spend hours meticulously crafting beads from wood, bone, or even pressed rose petals, stringing them together with careful precision. This act of creation was itself a form of prayer, a meditative labor that transformed raw materials into sacred objects that would aid the devotion of others or be used by the nuns themselves. The sale of such handcrafted items might also provide a small source of income for the convent, subtly connecting their spiritual labor with the practical needs of their community. The symbolism of the rosary extended beyond its practical use. Each bead represented a prayer, a moment of turning the heart towards God. The chain of beads symbolized the unbreakable bond of prayer that connected the individual nun to the communion of saints, to her sisters in the convent, and to the entire church. Cross at the end of the rosary anchored the devotion in the central mystery of Christ's sacrifice, ensuring that Marian prayer always led back to her Son. It was a complete spiritual journey, a microcosm of the entire Christian narrative, contained within a string of beads. For a medieval nun, the rosary was more than just a tool. It was a beloved companion, a silent witness to her faith, and a powerful instrument through which she constantly sought a deeper relationship with God and His Blessed Mother. Number 1. The crucifix. No object in a medieval nunnery held greater significance, or was more profoundly central to the faith of its inhabitants, than the crucifix. From the grand towering crucifix that dominated the convent chapel to the smaller personal ones tucked into a nun's cell, this sacred image of Christ on the cross was the unwavering focal point of their devotion, meditation, and understanding of salvation. For a medieval nun, the crucifix was not merely an artistic representation. It was a tangible, ever-present reminder of the ultimate sacrifice, the boundless love of God, and the very core of her vows of self-denial and spiritual union with Christ. Crucifixes varied greatly in size, material, and artistry. The main crucifix in the chapel, often suspended above the altar or positioned prominently, could be life-sized or even larger, carved from wood and painted with lifelike, and often starkly realistic, depictions of Christ's suffering. These larger pieces often featured a suffering Christ, reflecting the medieval emphasis on the humanity of Jesus and the pathos of His sacrifice. Smaller crucifixes for personal devotion might be made of wood, bronze, or silver, sometimes intricately carved, sometimes strikingly simple. Corpus, or body of Christ, attached to the cross, was the central element, often depicted with meticulous detail, from the wounds on His hands and feet to the crown of thorns on His head. Crucifix served as the primary object of veneration in the convent. Nuns would kneel before it often for extended periods, lost in contemplation of Christ's passion. They might kiss the feet of the crucified Christ, a profound gesture of humility and love, or simply gaze upon the image, allowing its visual power to stir their hearts and minds. During the Good Friday liturgy, The veneration of the cross was a central emotional ritual, where each nun would approach and kiss the cross, renewing her spiritual commitment in the face of Christ's sacrifice. This direct physical interaction with the crucifix underscored its role as a conduit for grace and a focus for profound spiritual connection. Historically, the depiction of Christ crucified became increasingly common in the medieval period, moving from earlier, more triumphal images of the resurrected Christ to a deeper focus on his suffering humanity. This shift coincided with a broader spiritual movement that encouraged personal empathy with Christ's passion. For nuns whose lives were patterned on Christ's obedience and sacrifice, the suffering Christ on the crucifix offered a powerful model of endurance, humility, and unconditional love. It was a constant call to embrace their own spiritual suffering and self-denial as a means of uniting with their Lord. The symbolic weight of the crucifix was immense. It represented the central mystery of Christian faith, the atonement for sins through Christ's death and resurrection. For a nun, every aspect of her life, her vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, her daily prayers, her communal living, was understood through the lens of Christ's sacrifice on the cross. It was a reminder that true spiritual life involved dying to oneself, just as Christ died on the cross in order to experience new life. Crucifix symbolized redemption, hope, and the ultimate victory of love over death. Nuns involved in the convent's artistic endeavors might have contributed to the creation or adornment of crucifixes. Whether painting the details of a large wooden corpus, embroidering a cloth to hang behind the altar crucifix, or carving a small devotional piece for a sister's cell, every act of creation was an act of profound piety. The meticulous effort involved in crafting these images was a prayer in itself, dedicating their skills and labor to the glorification of God and the spiritual edification of their community. The materials, from humble wood to gleaming metals, were transformed by their hands into sacred instruments of devotion. Presence of the crucifix in every significant space within the nunnery, the chapel, the chapter house, the refectory, the infirmary, and individual cells, ensured that its message was inescapable. It was the first thing a nun might see upon waking, and the last thing she might contemplate before sleep. It was the backdrop to every communal prayer and every personal reflection. Its omnipresence reinforced the fundamental truth of their faith, reminding them always of the source of their salvation and the ultimate purpose of their lives. It was the enduring symbol of their commitment, their solace in times of trial, and their guiding light towards eternal union with the divine, perpetually inspiring their faith within the hallowed walls of their medieval home.